We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! I'm back and I bring to you the part 11 of What If Naruto Gained Unwanted Immortality. The fourth Shinobi War has ended with the sealing of Kaguya and the Juubi in Naruto. As the years pass and his unwanted immortality becomes clear, what will Naruto do when everyone he once fought for returns to dust as the world about him changes? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 61, Battle of Bellatona. Golden lotus-patterned eyes flickered to the side in time to see the night air distort as a tall, spiky blonde man with a chibi fox on top appeared without a sound. "Welcome back Naruto," Kurama Arya spoke out in her musical voice, dipping her head respectfully to the Juubi, as she quickly slipped her small hand into her lover's. "I'm back Arya." The fox merely grunted his greeting as Naruto gently brushed her knuckles to his lips before landing a swift peck on her own, causing her to faintly flush in return. A noise that could have been mistaken for distant thunder grumbled behind them, causing Naruto to turn around and chuckle. "And don't think I forgot about you Azura." His other hand swiftly rose to a small patch of leathery skin between the dragon's metallic scales before roughly scratching away at it. Immediately, a content rumbling that shook the ground as Azura practically purred, closing his eyes in satisfaction even as his rider sweat dropped. "Are you a cat or something?" Shaking their heads, the couple jumped onto Azura's neck where there was a saddle for two, recently gifted to Naruto from Oromiz for saving his and Glade's life, before settling in with Arya's arms around Naruto's waist, not bothering to use the belts built into the saddle in favor of using chakra. Seamlessly creating a shadow clone, Naruto ordered it to Ajihad, who even now was waiting for a report of the talk, to tell him of what transpired. He had a feeling that the stoic man would be widely grinning before the dawn came. Once the clone shunshined away, Azura turned his rippled eyes away from the city and tensed, bunching his powerful hindquarters before shooting up into the night sky. Quickly, the group found themselves a kilometer above the ground with Azura idly flying towards the elf's mostly abandoned tent. Silently, the four flew with the only sound coming from the whistling wind. Neither Arya nor Azura needed to ask about the meeting as they were keyed into it the entire time. Ever since they had discovered their mental link to each other, all of them had experienced and shared several of their memories with each other, both the painful and the joyful ones, to the point that they could have held an entire conversation with just their eyes alone, though they both much preferred using their voices. Shivering a little in the chilly night air, Arya hugged herself closer to the blonde, who just quietly smiled at her action, to ward off the biting chill before resting her flushed cheek against his broad back. It was in this way they arrived in front of her tent near the outskirts of the camp as Azura made sure to soften his landing in order to not overly jostle his passengers. "See you tomorrow for the battle, Azura." Chuckling at the excited gleam in his dragon's rippled eyes, Naruto spun around to face Arya, only to feel his breath hitch at the sight of her angelic features and flushed alabaster cheeks from the cold. Slowly, his azure eyes slipped down to her slighted parted lips, turned pink from their usual coral red, before climbing back up to her deep forest green eyes with small flecks of brilliant gold that burned back with equal desire, her earlier arousal making itself known to the blonde. "Beautiful," Naruto uttered as his fingers traced along the smooth curve of her jaw, eliciting a small shiver from Arya as he brushed over a particularly sensitive scrape near her chin. "Naruto," whispered Arya before her velvet-soft lips crashed against Naruto's. Grasping at the blonde's hand with one of her own, Arya stared back with half-lidded eyes as she snaked her other hand around his muscular neck to deepen the kiss. It was something Naruto noticed. Although he was usually the one to initiate their more intimate moments, it was Arya that typically took them further. Other men might have taken it as an insult to their manliness, but to Naruto, he was more than happy to let the elf take the lead in this. Besides, what exactly was there to complain about a goddess-like beauty coming on to you herself? Below, Azura groaned as his passengers essentially used him as a make-out seat as they began to kiss, which grew deeper and more passionate by the minute as their hands began roaming about each other's bodies. A tick mark started to form near his horns as the couple showed no signs of moving or at least sparing him of the sight of his rider and mate-locking lips. Just as Azura was about to just toss them off his back and into the tent, even if it meant risking his rider's displeasure, he was a dragon, dammit, not a love seat. Naruto apparently felt that a more comfortable setting was due as, while still respecting her vow to never be seen out of her armor, he suddenly picked Arya up in a bridle hold and darted into the tent, the folds closing behind them for a more extensive workout. Finally, they got off my back. A second longer and I would have just thrown them in there, damn the consequences. Just as he laid down on his belly and closed his eyes to rest, loud moans, both male and female, erupted out from the tent, causing the now 75 feet long dragon to let out a groan of his own, only instead of pleasure it was of pure vexation. Slamming his head into the ground, armored paws closed around his ears as he mentally blocked out his connection to the rather loud lovers, hoping only that they would fall asleep sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, the young dragon was in for a long night. Neither needed much sleep, Naruto with his ungodly stamina and Arya being an elf, a race that barely required extended rest in the first place, and now part Otsutsuki, which forced the poor dragon to eventually fall into a fitful slumber to the sounds of the intense make-out session of his rider and his mate. XXX, forward men! Into the breach! Yelled Eragon as he led the charge of the massive Varden army through the recently blown-up gates, courtesy of a certain blonde, as Saphira and Azura flew over the ramparts to start the slaughter. Seeing the eager look the black dragon had made the young rider smile with nostalgia as he briefly remembered when a much smaller Saphira, even smaller than Azura now, had a similar look in their first real battle in Farthendur. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted as black-fletched arrow whizzed near his cheek before being deflected off by an invisible force. Snapping his head in the direction from where the arrow came from, Eragon cursed his stupid moment of carelessness before bounding up at the spotted archer. The last thing the wide-eyed archer saw was the impossible sight of an elf-like human running up the 20-feet stone wall before everything faded to black as an iridescent sapphire blade cleaved him in two. Meanwhile the elven spellweavers, who doubled as additional firepower and as Eragon's/Saphira's personal guards, bemusedly stared at their charge as he leaped back down and rushed to join the two dragons who already painted the streets red with the blood of the Empire's soldiers. So this is what Naruto Fineral has been teaching Eragon Fineral. Bradburn noted in amazement along with the others as Eragon sprinted and fought at speeds that made him appear as a blur even to their sharp eyes. Even them, who were considered as the best, both physically and magically, would have had a hard time moving as fast at a dead sprint, never mind incorporating such extreme velocity into combat itself. Bladgarmelda, just look at how Shade's lair moves as swift as the wind and yet with the precision of an arrow. One of the male elves, Worden, exclaimed in admiration as they swiftly followed Eragon through the gates. Indeed Worden Vadr, the young rider has truly grown strong. But do not let your awareness slip. Even if he may surpass most if not all of us physically, he and Saphira can both still be brought down by a stray bolt or spell. So, wards now! Yelled out the indigo-furred elf as hundreds of arrows from the secondary inner wall covered the sky, promising death to anyone caught without wards or a sturdy shield. Nodding, several of the elves called out No Arroya to deflect any arrows coming at the Varden host while the others threw up barriers against possible spells designed to penetrate such wards for the Varden, Eragon, and the dragons. Less than a second later, the rain of projectiles smashed against the elven wards, some merely being deflected while others were reduced to splinters which injured some but killed none of the rebels. For an instant, nothing made a sound except for the clattering of arrows on the stone pavement before a thundering cheer shook the air as men, fully expecting to meet their end from the arrow storm, roared out their joy of living another day. Thank you Master Elf / we appreciate the help. As they passed into the city and the elves, both the army men and the Varden's own spellcasters tilted their heads towards the fair elves, the former just grateful for their survival and the latter due to being able to save their energy reserves. A few meters away, Eragon gave a short nod of approval to the elves, glad that they were serious about their promise of devoting their efforts to the Varden as a whole rather than to him and Saphira alone. A pair of shadows overlapping with his own was the only indication of the presence of the blonde shinobi with a fox on his head and a raven/platinum-haired elf that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Not even the air was disturbed enough for him to detect with his enhanced senses. Hey Eragon! How's the fight going? But before he could yell back a greeting, several spears shot towards them, the spearmen taking advantage of the seemingly unsuspecting trio. They couldn't be more wrong. As the first spear approached, Eragon stretched out his arm to grab at the offending projectile before spinning about to preserve and add further momentum to his imminent throw. With a shout, he hurled back the spear back and threw its owner, violently pinning the man through his leather jerkin and into the wooden wall several meters away. Grimly smiling at his throw, Eragon turned around in time to see Naruto slightly tilt his head to the side, causing the spear to whiz past his cheek by millimeters, and then throw something big wrapped in bandages at the two remaining men while Arya merely stood still, unruffled as her own spear missed her by several inches. What puzzled the young rider was why his blonde teacher, someone he never saw miss, no matter how far or fast the target was, unless he wanted to, so casually threw his weapon, as unusual and large it was, to the enemy. Surely the two remaining spearmen would dodge, only for his eyes to widen in horror and amazement as the sword, if he could even call it that, unbound the bandages around itself, revealing hundreds of dark bluish-gray scales running down its entirety until its hilt, at the base of which was a small skull. If that was all, Eragon would have simply arched an eyebrow at its unusual appearance before dismissing the sword from his mind. He had after all seen many strange and unusual things during his time with the elves and especially with Naruto. However, he most certainly could not ignore the fact that where the point should have been was instead a giant mouth lined with razor-sharp teeth that uttered a small squeal of delight as it proceeded to enlarge and rapidly engulf both of the now screaming men. A second or two later, the two men's cries of pain were silenced as a sickening cracking sound of bones and tendons echoed out across the bloody street. Eragon watched with revulsion as the thing, this monster disguised as a sword, chewed up its prey a few times before starting to flop back like a seal to its owner, who he noted only had a slight hint of exasperation on his face. When Samahata started to pass by him, the sword suddenly paused, its still bloody mouth gaping open as if tasting the air, before whirling on him with a wide grin. Instinctively, Eragon's sword-bearing arm slashed upward toward Samahata, intent on slashing through its scales and ending the abomination, only for breezing to be stopped cold by one of the protruding scales that stuck out from its body. Jijijijai. Somehow, the rider knew he was being laughed at. But before he could send additional chakra into his arms and his sword for another strike, a tanned hand quickly plucked at the giggling sword's hilt. Now Samahata, bad boy, chided Naruto as he flicked a scale near the gaping maw. For a second, Eragon worried whether Samahata would attack the blonde when it growled at Naruto for disturbing its fun, only to nearly drop his sword when the scaled beast started to purr like a cat after the sage channeled some of his potent chakra into it. As Naruto slowly petted Samahata, Eragon slowly pointed a shaking finger at the strange sight. Just what is that beast? Arching an eyebrow at his student, Naruto briefly paused before continuing. Well, Eragon, this is Samahata, one of the 7 most famous and powerful swords from where I came from. Eragon shot a dull look at Naruto before replying in a bland tone. That's not a sword. A loud growl filled the air, making Eragon tense in alarm. Hush, you're upsetting him. The surrounding elves and dragons sweat dropped when they saw the powerful blonde increase the rate of petting and chakra to the insatiable blade, immediately calming the sword down. Turning to Arya didn't help as the elf just calmly held on to the hilt of Eilingra. The other elves, and Eragon to a lesser extent, still had a hard time believing that the sword of the first ever rider was gripped just a few feet away, while keeping an eye all around them. Now I do believe we were in the middle of a battle. Shall we go in with a bang? Excitement gleamed in his cerulean eyes as he hefted the sentient blade over his shoulder and leapt onto the saddle, with Arya close behind him. Even though the men of the Empire posed as much threat as the insects beneath his boot, he was a shinobi in the end. And all shinobi, especially him, enjoyed a fight, especially ones as large as this. Without waiting for Eragon, the three blasted off high into the air without a care for the cloud of arrows heading towards them. After all, why should they? No blade or arrow could hope to even come close to penetrating Azura's metallic hide, which was further reinforced by Naruto's Azura path. And the thick river of chakra running through the dragon deterred all but the most powerful of spells from even affecting him. As for Naruto and Arya, nothing had to be said. Eclipsing the secondary wall that separated the castle from the rest of the city, Azura roughly landed on the battlements, his powerful claws effortlessly tearing away the wood and stone that had existed for almost as long as the city had. Any unfortunate soul that stood between said wall and claw met their end as red smears, unable to even be recognized for who they were. Once done with the men on the wall, Azura snapped his head downward when more spears were thrown up at him, only for them to be deflected back to the ground. A sinister grin appeared on the dragon's face as he gazed at over 10,000 men in steel and leather armor who all uneasily gulped down their fear. These must be the reserve forces Bradburn was talking about, Naruto thought as he quickly scanned the area, noting how several of them were bashing at the reinforced castle entrance. Good to see Bradburn kept his word. Oi furball, want to stretch your legs? A lazy red eye opened before closing. I have no interest in these sorry excuses for insects. Shrugging at the expected answer, Naruto turned to his companion. Shall we, Aryaheim? Naruto asked as he readied Samahata. Do you even have to ask? A chuckle ran through the blonde at Arya's blunt retort, making the elf flash her own small, but eager smile. Always. And with that, the mind-linked trio pounced on the men like wolves on sheep. XXX. Meanwhile a distance away, Eragon, Saphira, and the elven spellweavers opted to lead and reinforce the men of the Varden in securing the rest of the city and routing out the remaining several thousand imperial soldiers that stood in the way of victory. I wonder where Naruto and Arya went, thought Eragon as he charged at the densely packed men after leaping off of Saphira, who continued on to bowl over and either outright kill or maim anyone in her path, while reinforcing his body with chakra to cushion his landing. Eyeing the wall of spears, swords, and shields in his path, Eragon hands blurred through a single seal before muttering the jutsu Naruto taught both him and Arya 2 weeks ago. Henge no jutsu. Eyes widened and then narrowed on both sides as Eragon transformed himself into an innocuous little rock. The same rock Eragon first coached Naruto with while teaching him about magic and the ancient language and subsequently was nailed with until he managed to get the jutsu to a single seal. Piercing through the small gap between the shields of the soldiers, Eragon disengaged the transformation while spinning in a full circle, relying on his superhuman strength and the keen enchanted edge of Breezinger to slash through both armored and unarmored throats, blood spraying out like a water fountain and staining the air crimson. Without waiting for the men to respond, Eragon threw himself deeper into their ranks. For a second, the red-armored men stood still, their eyes bulging at the sight of a man turning into a rock, and then back while reaping the lives of half a dozen of their comrades in a blink of an eye. And then in the next instant, the nearest were yelling, their swords raised to slash and stab at the rider while those a step further away shuffled backward to reform the line, their spears, pikes and shields beginning to form an impenetrable shield wall formation. It was all for naught. Light on his feet, Eragon seemingly danced forward, his momentum combined with his flowing swordplay allowed him to effortlessly slice through metal, leather, and bone. So swift was he that not even a single drop of blood managed to stain his armor. Upon seeing the closing formation, the man-turned-rider stooped low to where the shields didn't reach, cutting through the fragile ankles of the men while ignoring the cries of pain and fright that echoed in his sensitive ears. It was hardly the proper way of wielding a sword, but his training with Naruto had beat all such naive notions out of his young mind. Leaving the crippled men to the Varden, Eragon plunged deeper into the now chaotic formation with Saphira at his side as they carved their way through the Empire's men. Before he gained control of his chakra network, the soldiers' reactions would have seemed slow and clumsy to him, but with the energy of shinobi coursing through his body, the same men appeared to be standing still as he cut them down with impunity. With a bellow, 100-feet-long sapphire dragon leapt forward, stomping half that number of men into the unforgiving ground as she let loose a searing inferno of blue and yellow flame from her maw that only grew larger as she waved her head from side to side, instantly turning those caught in it to ash and leaving only a few alive as they were protected by the Empire's own spellcasters. There's only one reason for only those men to remain unaffected by Saphira's fire. Eragon narrowed his eyes before yelling out at his dragon, Saphira. Even though Eragon merely pointed with his eyes at the survivors, the dragon knew exactly what her rider meant. Roaring, the hulking beast barreled her way towards them, batting away anyone that stood in her path. Once dealt with, the surrounding soldiers quickly panicked at the loss of their captains and commanders before falling to the Varden who had by then caught up. Right behind Eragon, the elven spellweavers searched with their minds for the 20 spellcasters they were informed of while protecting each other's minds from being exploited in a stunning display of coordination and trust. Before long, Eragon and Saphira were standing at the second, and last, gate that lead to the heart of Bellatona, the castle of Lord Bradburn. Even as he raised his shield to block several arrows coming at him, Saphira snorted, simply moving her bulk in front of her rider and blocking the projectiles with her body. The arrows that once would have decimated softer parts like her wings no longer bothered her, as a combination of wards and her natural durability prevented her from feeling anything but a slight prick or two. "Saphira, cover me. What do you think I'm doing, little one?" Saphira sarcastically grunted out, swatting aside a platoon of soldiers who foolishly tried to drive off the duo from the gate. Eragon just chuckled before first stabbing Breezinger into the gate to determine whether there were any enchantments reinforcing it. Finding none, Eragon sheathed his sword and tossed his shield onto the ground before splaying his hands on the over 1-ton reinforced oak gates. With a massive grunt, Eragon's armor bulged in the back and seemed on the verge of splitting as the young rider pushed, the heavy wooden entrance slowly inching back. With a final growl, he transferred chakra throughout his body before giving one last heave, the once reluctant door slamming open with a resounding boom. Immediately leaping back while plucking his discarded shield from the ground, Eragon ducked beneath it while leaning down, allowing his entire body to be protected by the shield from the impending retaliatory attacks, only to feel nothing but the cool, bloody breeze. "Wait." Snapping his head over the rim of the shield, Eragon's arms dropped to the side as he gazed what he could only describe as absolute carnage. Broken swords, daggers, spears, pikes, and shields beyond count littered the ground across the courtyard and the perimeter of the castle, with their owners lying beside them. Stepping over a corpse, Eragon noticed the various wounds that ended their lives, clean cuts, burns, blunt trauma, and decapitation to name a few. And then there were some that looked shaved, for lack of a better term, to ribbons. It slightly unnerved him, to realize that over half of the Empire's soldiers were slaughtered not a few meters away, and he didn't even notice. Granted, he wasn't actively sensing them, but still. It did explain, however, why most of the other elves had sickened expressions during the several hours of fighting to get to the inner gate. "Yo, Eragon. You guys finally arrived." In the middle of the sea of blood and guts was a familiar blonde Samahata back in its bandages and on his back, and was currently waving at the dragon rider pair, with Arya, who merely bobbed her head in greeting before going back to cleaning her sword, by his side as they sat on a napping Azura's neck, waiting for the rest of the Varden to arrive. At this point, Eragon wouldn't have been surprised if 10 times the number of men were killed after having witnessed his teacher annihilating 5,000 men in less than a few seconds back at the Burning Plains. So instead, the younger rider marched past the gore and bodies towards the trio, no quartet now that he could see the fox on top of Naruto, as Saphira made small talk with Azura. "Hey Naruto and Arya, I assume the three of you were responsible for all of this?" Eragon questioned as he scanned the area for any potential threats, not that he expected any considering who slaughtered all of the men. Actually, it was Aryaheim over here who did most of the work. She seemed quite eager to test her new abilities in the field, while Azura and I just bonded over our first fight together. Azura hummed underneath them in approval while Arya whacked her mate over the head with her sheath, muttering, "You did not have to reveal that, Naruto." Realizing the battle was basically over, Eragon's tense nerves loosened as he let out a loud laugh at the antics of the three. Walking the last few steps between them, Eragon clapped his hands on both Naruto's and Arya's shoulders. "Then let's go," Eragon began as Arya's eyes widened, the Tensigan blazing back to life as she snapped her head towards the castle gates. Leaping off of Azura, the elf narrowed her eyes as she gazed through the last pair of gates and its 1-foot-thick oak. Flashing to her side, Naruto asked the question they all had. "What do you see, Arya, that's gotten you so spooked?" Closing his eyes, Naruto sent out his senses, only to heavily frown when he felt something vile, something so bloodstained that if tossed into a river, the waters would have run red for weeks. "I see that you felt it." Arya sighed, filled with a sense of shame towards her race as she kept her eyes on the human currently charging through the corridor behind the castle entrance before uttering, "A Dothdirt." Behind the pair, the elves widened their eyes in slight disbelief before readying their weapons and spells, while Eragon looked in confusion, not knowing what this Dothdirt was. "Ah, I see," Naruto murmured, understanding why the elves around him suddenly radiated shame. With a hollow boom, the gates flew open with a cloud of smoke, causing the nearest Varden to cough and cover up their faces. Soon, the drumming of ironclad hooves against the paving stones filled the air as a horse and its rider burst through the center of the smoke. In his left hand, the unknown horseman carried what Eragon initially took for as a common lance, until he noticed that instead of common wood and metal, it was made of a strange green material and had a barbed blade forged in an unfamiliar pattern. The faint glow surrounding the head of the lance further betrayed that the common lance was anything but common. As the rider charged at them, Naruto turned to Arya. "Should I handle this, or do you want to?" Without any hesitance, the strongest elf stepped forward, blocking the path towards both Ashura and Saphira. "I will." Shrugging, Naruto backed up to where Eragon and the elves were forming words on their lips. Holding out his arm, Naruto called out, "Don't interfere, she's got this." For a second, Bradburn looked as if he wasn't going to listen as the traces of an animalistic snarl appeared on his feline face. That soon changed when his bestial instincts suddenly screamed at him to shut up when Kurama, who had been napping the entire time, cracked open an eye in irritation at what he considered an inferior product of Shinobi. "Besides, she doesn't need any help, see?" As the elves reluctantly stopped their chanting, Naruto waved at the rider who tugged on the reins and angled his steed toward Saphira and Ashura, ignoring the elf in his path as he fully intended to run her over. Opposite of him, both of the dragons tensed in preparation for the fight. It's not that they didn't trust their friend to protect them, but rather as a precaution should anything happen. In response to the man's charge, Arya lifted a hand, her palm open to the sky, as her Tensigen began to glow with a radiant light. When the lancer was but a few feet away, Arya suddenly clenched her hands into a fist, her fingers squeezing tightly together as a sudden screeching sound filled the air. "Damn, that move reminds me of Gaara, only she doesn't even need sand or anything really to crush someone." Naruto thought with morbid fascination as he watched the poor man get telekinetically crushed into a bloody ball of pulped flesh and steel. Without direction from his rider, the horse came to a gradual stop as the unidentified Dothdirt fell and bounced against the paving stones, sounding more like pottery than metal. Off in the distance, several screams of pain rang out as the brains of the spellcasters who were shielding the charging knight forcibly exploded from the amount of energy needed to protect said knight from the immense pressure Arya used. "I believe those were the remaining spellcasters," Bradburn noted after witnessing the gory display of power from his princess, only for his ears to twitch at the sound of hurried steps of leather boots on stone. As the men of the Varden rushed to surround the potential threat, Naruto and the others walked over to Arya who was examining the fallen Dothdirt, its barbed tip still glowing a faint emerald. "Which one is it, Arya Svitkona?" Bladgarm questioned as he too knelt to examine the arcane lance. At her elder's question, Arya took one final glance over before answering. "If I am not mistaken, Bladgarmelda, its name is Nirnan, the orchid." It was at this point Eragon remembered what exactly a Dothdirt was from one of the texts Oromis had him read. Recoiling back in disgust, Eragon unconsciously let out a snarl that Saphira beside him reciprocated, obviously infuriated to see the weapon that those present at the time swore that the dragon's blood rained from the sky like a summer downpour. "But I thought all of the Dothdirtia were destroyed or lost beyond recovery?" Eragon asked. "Obviously we were mistaken. It would appear that Nirnan was at some point passed into the hands of the Waldegrave family, and they must have kept it hidden here in Bellatona." A frown marred Arya's fair face as she turned to Naruto. "But love, didn't Lord Bradburn agree to keep his men from the battle and allow us to take care of the Empire unopposed?" Several pairs of eyes flickered to Naruto for answers. However, just as he was about to answer, several city guards with the Waldegrave insignia surrounding a certain portly lord hurriedly filed out of the open gates, who were swiftly circled by the men of the Varden. "Well, speak of the devil, wait, let them come. We have an agreement with Lord Bradburn after all." Naruto yelled out at the rebels. "As you wish, God of Slaughter." The blonde sighed as he heard his title. He couldn't well deny it right now considering the over 5,000 dead men around them. "Naruto Uzumaki, thank you for not killing us right away, but I had to come to apologize for what happened," Lord Bradburn said, his face a slightly green due to the gore-filled surroundings. His men doing little better as they resisted the urge to throw up at the gruesome death of the Dothdirt-wielding knight. "So just what did happen, Lord Bradburn, because I clearly remember you swearing on your departed son that you would keep all of your men in the castle and let us handle this." The air seemed to thicken as the elves focused their glares on the Bellatonan men. "That wasn't me. By the time I was told of this, it was already too late and the Dothdirt my family kept as an heirloom was taken. Please, it was never my intent for any of your dragons to be in danger." The Lord of Bellatona pled to Naruto to understand that he had nothing to do with the unexpected attack. "And I believe you." Naruto really did. He had already read the man's aura and knew he wasn't being lied to. "As promised, none of your men were harmed and your family will remain in control of Bellatona." A loud exhale could be heard as Bradburn closed his eyes in relief, grateful that the god of slaughter was not some unreasonable thug looking for the smallest excuse to kill them. Gulping, he brought up the next item he wanted to discuss. And what about Nirnan? Will the lance my family has kept for almost hundreds of years be returned? This time it wasn't Naruto that answered, but Eragon, who had a rather scary look on his face. No, you will not be getting the Dothert back. Not only because such terrible instruments of war should have been destroyed long ago, but because that accursed lance could have seriously harmed or even killed Saphira. Eragon shot back with a steely tone. But Lord Bradburn began until Naruto abruptly interrupted him. I'm afraid I agree with Eragon on this. Such a horrific weapon should never have fallen into anyone's hands. It was good to see you again, Lord Bradburn. Naruto interjected as he leaped back onto Azura's back, Arya following suit less than a second later, Nirnan in hand. For a moment, it seemed as if the governor would protest. Finally, he decided to cut his losses. Farewell Naruto Uzumaki, and thank you once again for giving me closure. With a last nod, Naruto turned to the elves and Eragon in particular. We will be returning to the camp. Ajihad should know the city has been secured. Nodding back, Eragon paused before asking one last question. And what of the Dothert? Glancing back at Arya, Naruto saw her shake her head before he turned back. Let's decide what to do with it later, Eragon, at least not with so many eyes and ears around us. Will do, Naruto. See you back at camp, all four of you. Eragon waved his hand as he leapt onto Saphira's back to rat out any last remnants of the Empire, the elves following close behind as they fulfilled their duties as guards. Cracking the paved ground, Azura surged up into the sky, swiftly flying up until Bellatona was but a small speck on the ground. Not directly heading towards the Varden, Azura flew around the area, stretching his cramped wings after having fought in a restricted area for so long. As he did, Naruto leaned back with his hands behind his head. So, why exactly haven't you destroyed Nirnan yet? From Outlink, I could feel the disgust and shame you held when you laid your eyes on that Dothert. And even though it has been extensively enchanted to resist magic, your Tensigan would crumple that lance as if it were paper. For a second, Arya didn't say anything, eyeing the baleful weapon in her petite hands, before revealing her intentions. I plan on using Nirnan during the final fight against Galbatorix, or more specifically against Shuriken himself. I know you won't be fighting alongside us against the Mad King, and I understand why. She sealed the lance in the storage space that Naruto had inked onto her hand before hugging him around his waist when the blonde turned away, feeling slightly guilty of his decision for not being overly involved. This was never your fight, you had no reason to help us. But you did, and for that I and the rest of Alagizia are eternally grateful for your aid. The elf tightened her hold on Naruto when she felt his warm hands envelop her own. And because of that, it is only right that we, the denizens of Alagizia, fight the last fight ourselves. As such, as much as I hate to admit it, we need the Dothert. For all the increases in mine and Eragon's strength, we are still outmatched against Galbatorix, even with Blodgarm and his elves. After the king and his dragon are dead, then I will destroy it. I see. Naruto closed his eyes while sighing, I'm sorry that I will not fight alongside you all in the final battle against Galbatorix and that forcing you to use a weapon you obviously loathe. A slender finger pressed against his lips, preventing from saying further. Remember, no one blames you. And you did not force me, I decided to do so. Arya said softly before gently kissing Naruto's cheek. Silently, the couple leaned against each other, their eyes shut and their chakra instinctively active, as they spent the rest of the time in the air just enjoying each other's presence. Meanwhile, Kurama unsummoned himself with a poof of smoke, clearly not finding the cool air at the high altitude they were flying at to his liking. And with that, all was well. It was already near sunset when they began to descend as Azura's metallic black scales shone dully in the dying light. Cracking his eyes open, Naruto noted how Arya was still resting as he gradually raised his arms above his head, softly groaning in pleasure as several of his joints popped. But just as he was about to wake her, a voice filled with urgency blared through his head. Boss, boss, boss. Do you hear me? We have a problem. Recognizing the voice to be that of the clone he left on Galbatorix, Naruto's faintly foggy eyes instantly regained their clarity. I hear you, just what happened that has you so alarmed? Naruto shot back, for some reason already dreading his clone's answer. It was something he realized recently. He had been randomly getting strange feelings he just could not explain. But his thoughts grinded to a halt when the spider clone replied back. Drasliona is no more. Chapter 62, Destruction. Silence. That was Naruto's answer to the horrific piece of information his clone just shared with him. He did not start yelling out in horror and anger or freeze up as his younger self was apt to do. Instead, other than the slightest hitch in breath, the elder shinobi subtly isolated his mind to prevent Azura and Arya, especially Arya, from sensing his turbulent emotions. Calm down and report. What exactly happened? Was it Galbatorix? Naruto swiftly messaged back, his fingers almost denting Azura's armor from worry and thinly suppressed anger. The fury usually so slow to rouse now threatening to burst from its confines before he quickly suppressed it. He didn't have to wait long for the spider clone to respond. By the log, he's a madman boss. Ever since you beat his ass down, the bastard has been completely terrified of you. But he's clever. Knowing he can't move against you directly, he decided to do the next best thing. Knowing you fought for the Varden, he flew to Drasliona, and broke all of the civilians' minds before turning them into unfeeling monsters, men, women, and even the children. So many, that their sheer number would have dwarfed the quantity of soldiers present during the Battle of the Burning Plains. Pausing, the clone murmured after sending several memories of what the king had done to his own citizens, showing his creator how Galbatorix utilized the ancient language to twist the minds of Drasliona's population into bloodthirsty creatures even as the king and his dragon beat a hasty retreat back to their stronghold. I'm sorry boss, but I couldn't do anything, not without giving myself away. No, it's not your fault. With the amount of chakra I imparted to you, even if you confronted Galbatorix, you wouldn't have been able to do anything. Still, that bastard. Viewing the images, a vein pulsed on Naruto's forehead as carefully controlled rage finally broke through the barriers he had set up earlier against Azura and Arya as if they were wet paper, dousing the two with the fury he felt at the atrocities Galbatorix had committed just to get to him. Startled at the sudden rush of anger through their bond, Azura nearly cracked his sinuous neck, whipping his head back in concern, only to feel a shiver run down his spine at the sight of two icy cold eyes radiating carefully controlled killing intent. Behind the blonde, Arya jerked her head up as she violently awoke, her sword already an inch out of its leather sheath. Naruto, just what? Whatever she was about to say was abruptly interrupted when Naruto's fingers, faster than even what Arya could perceive, zipped through the air to hit the cluster of nerves at the back of her neck. The last thing Arya saw before her vision faded away was a sad smile from her lover, which only further confused her as to why Naruto attacked her. Catching her falling form as she blacked out, Naruto clasped his hands behind her back into the snake seal and whispered, Mokuton, Moku Bunshin no Jutsu. As a wood clone grew from his rider, Azura felt confused, having only felt Naruto's emotions, but not what caused them. But why and to what? Never have I seen such rage from Naruto, not even when Umarath and the other Eldenari tried to subject him to their will. And so Azura attempted to feel what was wrong through their link, only to encounter a strong, yet permeable barrier that, upon further observation, seemed to filter certain thoughts or emotions from him. If the dragon only suspected something was wrong, now he was getting seriously worried. Ever since their bonding, never have either of them denied anything short of full access to each other's minds, except for a few light shields so as give each other, along with Arya, a measure of privacy. But for Naruto to suddenly close off his mind not just to me but also Arya, something is going on, thought Azura as he cautiously sent a mental tendril towards the barrier. However, before he could do so, a voice broke the silence. Azura, are you battle ready? The black metallic dragon started for a second at how emotionless Naruto sounded, so different from his warm and inviting self before quickly answering back. Chakra levels and stamina levels are nearly full, the battle did not consume much energy and whatever was spent I quickly gained back. No injuries whatsoever. Nodding in acknowledgement, Naruto turned to the oblivious elf who even unconscious, still shone with an inner light that dazzled all who beheld her. Leaning down, Naruto gently parted her silky waist-length raven platinum locks from her smooth forehead before kissing it, a sad smile breaking his impassive expression as he did so. I'm sorry Haim, I know you would follow me anywhere, no matter the price or consequences, but this is something I don't want you to even see, never mind helping me in. Naruto whispered as he trailed his calloused fingers along her defined jawline before glancing at the clone who tilted its own head before disappearing in a flash of yellow and instantly reappearing in Arya's tent. Laying the unconscious elf on the one bedroll, the wood clone proceeded to kneel down in the Saiza position beside her, waiting for her to inevitably wake up. Sighing, the clone knew full well that when Arya woke up, she would not be pleased. While she would never attempt to hurt Naruto due to anger, unless he did something really stupid or intentionally provoked her, which now that it thought about it was exactly what his creator did, she would definitely not hesitate with a mere clone due to her previous experience. And the last time it checked, a combination of Jonin-level chakra control, telekinesis, already greater than Kaguya and approaching Shikaku's chakra reserves, and an instinctive use of Tsunade's monster strength technique made for one hell of an attack. If it were a shadow clone, it probably would have already run for the hills, but for some reason, wood clone seemed more professional, and even in the face of impending doom, it stood steadfast. Back in the air, Naruto sighed before loosening the barrier between him and Azura, allowing the report and memories his clone had sent earlier to flow over to his dragon. Although Azura cared little about people other than Naruto, Arya, and Eragon, it infuriated him that the Mad King would commit similarly brutalize another race as his own. Before he could roar out his wrath, a comforting presence touched his mind. Instantly recognizing his rider's signature, Azura rapidly calmed down as his previously foul mood quickly dispersed. As he comforted his dragon, Naruto softly muttered, "Azura, the Varden is not ready for such a fight, especially when their opponents are not soldiers prepared to die, but mere citizens turned mad. Many of the Varden are merely regular people who have been forced from their homes, and should they be ordered to kill their fellow civilians." The blonde gently gripped one of Azura's spikes as he gave his chilling evaluation. They would break. A moment of quiet passed before Azura spoke. "Yes, they would, and from what I've seen from your memories, the process, at least the madness part, is irreversible. While you could restore their senses, the mind is a fickle thing. And your control over time is not fine enough to ensure that they won't just turn back into hatchlings. The only solution is..." Azura trailed off, not liking the solution he arrived at any more than Naruto did. "To end them." Naruto finished his dragon sentence as his fists clenched over a pair of kunai he had at some time unsealed while denting the tough metal with his fingers. Calming down, Naruto took one last look over at Arya's tent before turning down to Azura as his eyes shifted to the Rinne Sharingan. "Even though I didn't want to overly interfere with this war, this is a task only I can undertake, and that I am responsible for. I wish I could also send you away for this, but your oath in the ancient language binds you to follow me in whatever I do." The dragon nodded in confirmation, staying silent to let Naruto finish. "Azura, should we do this, our names may go down in Alagesia's history as the worst butchers of this era. Although it hardly matters to me as I'm not originally from here, this is your homeland, the birthplace of your species. I could still break that oath, to avoid staining your claws with the people of Alagesia. So I must ask, are you with me, Azura?" Azura's ringed eyes glowed like lava as he grimly replied, "To any end, my rider." And with that, the pair vanished from the sky. XXX. It was an ordinary summer evening for the second largest city of the empire. As the blazing sun sent out one final ray of orange and crimson glory before vanishing behind the horizon, a sliver of the moon that once subjugated the world slowly revealed itself as a retinue. Thousands of twinkling stars followed close behind. As the land gradually became bathed in the pale silvery glow of the moon, the waters of Lake Leona took on a shimmering quality as the waves of the largest lake lapped against the colossal city wall and grand port of the city. The only blight that ruined the idyllic view was a black three-peaked mountain over a mile high that seemed to suck in all light a small distance southwest of the city, Helgrind. All in all, it seemed all was well. 2 miles above the mountain's highest peak, a distortion appeared as Naruto and a near 100-foot dragon emerged back into Alagesia. Glancing down, Naruto scanned the area where he first encountered and then killed the Arezak as they feasted on human flesh to see a medium group of people, which included what looked like several priests and a contingent of slaves striding over to the mountain. Now that I think about it, perhaps I should thank them. After all, it was because of them I got caught up in this mess, found a beautiful woman to love, and even become a dragon rider. You hear that, Azura? Naruto briefly mused as he glanced away, eliciting an amused snort from his bonded dragon, before wincing and shielding his eyes when he shifted his gaze back to Drasliona and Helgrind. I almost forgot just how foul the city and that mountain were, muttered Naruto, clearly remembering when he first laid eyes on them while lifting the seal that prevented natural energy from entering his body. As the facial characteristics representative of his Sage Mode Level 1 emerged, the blonde arched an eyebrow at the numerous signatures before focusing two particular ones. From what Eragon said about his experience with the Arazak, their parents, the Lethablaka, also dwell inside the mountain. So that would explain the two relatively large signatures of Bija Chakra. Naruto's eyes grew wide as he realized just what he was sensing before closing his eyes to concentrate on the two orbs of energy, only to open them a few seconds later. No, it's not Bija Chakra. While dark, the malevolence I felt was from the creatures themselves, not their chakra. By now, Azura and Naruto had rejoined their minds, although both maintained the mental barriers between them and Arya so as to not alert the elf maiden. While Naruto was now preoccupied with feeling out the minds of Drasliona's citizens, Azura noted the thousands of life signatures scattered within the mountain. While he wasn't all too worried by the regular grunts of the Empire, the sheer number of chakra signatures, which meant spellcasters, made him cautious. Naruto, did you notice the number of spellcasters within the mountain? There are almost 200 of them in there alone, not to mention the over 100,000 poor souls within the city itself. Both of them shut their eyes for a moment, clearly remembering the horrific feeling Naruto felt when he opened himself to the world. Yeah, I did. Don't worry, remember the memories I ripped from Galbatorix? Well, I applied them to both you and me while you were asleep several days ago. With our far more potent chakra, you should be a tank against both physical and magical effects involving just about anything. Despite being one of the worst human beings to ever exist, he was a genius in creating wards against almost anything that could remotely harm him. Naruto grudgingly admitted. Although at first he had viewed magic as an inferior form of jutsu from the elemental nations, over time he had seen the true potential of the art. The only reason it hadn't been discovered was because nothing in the land had enough energy or power to truly render it powerful, until Galbatorix came along with his legion of Eldenari. However, the energy costs needed for truly reality-warping spells grew exponentially, rendering such impossible feats outside the realm of even Galbatorix and his Eldenari. The last time such power was used was by the most powerful of the Grey Folk who almost destroyed Allegezia with an uncontrolled spell. It was only after they had somehow bound magic, or the chakra hidden behind the first of the 8 gates, to the ancient language was magic able to be controlled. Unfortunately, the energy requirements to do so left their race as a whole diminished until they all but died out millennia ago. Pity, it would have been an interesting fight, mused Naruto as he reapplied the seal blocking natural energy from entering. I see, so how should we do this, Naruto? Questioned Azura, fully trusting Naruto's word as he continued to hover above several miles in the air. You take care of the ones in the mountain. I know you've always wanted to fight something else that could fly, so the Lethablaka should do nicely. As for me. Naruto hopped off the saddle before starting to hover towards the city that spanned around 50 square miles. I will take care of the people. Watching as his rider raised the hand that held proof of their bond, his palm that was marked with a white sun stretched towards the star-filled heavens, Azura asked one last question. Will they feel anything? A sad smile crossed Naruto's face as a dark blue basketball-sized Rasengan with tiny wind blades swirled into existence almost instantly above the Gedway Ignatia on his right palm. No. XXX. Along the dirt road that led to the dark mountain and completely oblivious to the dragon rider pair that hovered several miles above them, a procession of black-robed men and women slowly marched to the object of their obsession, Helgrind. Their robes flapped in the evening breeze, revealing their hidden truncated forms. One was missing a forearm, 2 were missing a leg each, and the first of their company was missing an arm and both legs, and was carried by oiled slaves on a small padded litter. They were the devout followers of Helgrind, a religion in which its disciples practiced self-mutilation and drank human blood in order to enlighten themselves and grow closer to the spiritual plane by severing their physical attachments to the mundane world. However, few outsiders knew that Helgrind itself was not what they worshipped. No, rather it was a who, the ones residing within its gloomy interior. The Arazak. For centuries, ever since the founding of Drasliona itself, the cult of Tosk has revered the Arazak in their mature form, the Lethablaka, offering human sacrifices for them to devour. And tonight was such a night as the priests and their acolytes led almost 20 slaves freshly bought from the massive slave market before a certain king converted the rest earlier that day. Breathing in the crisp night air, the armless, legless, toothless, and seemingly sexless figure who was carried on a bier by 6 oiled slaves at the head of the group tilted its head back and uttered a gruesome, gurgling whistle once they were in 10 feet of the mountain. Instantly, the men and women following him stopped as the 6 slaves carrying him also came to a halt. Like a well-oiled machine, all of the slaves sans the ones carrying him were shepherded to the side of the mountain by the disfigured priests and acolytes, their eyes dull and glazed over due to being drugged beforehand. One might think that the human followers of Helgrind would show even a small sign of mercy, that in at least one of their eyes there would be a small flash of disgust or anger for sending their fellow men, women, and even children into the meat grinder. But no. Instead, there was only a fervent zeal and fanaticism in the eyes of the disciples of the cult as they ushered their victims to the front. Finished, they fell back behind the limbless thing. Eyes like chips of obsidian, the deformed creature opened its toothless mouth to call out in a strange, oddly accented dialect to them. Fellow followers of the Old Ones, we stand here today before the majesty that is Helgrind, home of the gods, to pay tribute. A clamor ran through the crowd before they were quieted when their limbless master continued with a hate-filled voice. It was on this day, 4 months ago, when the 2 children of the Old Ones were murdered, ambushed by a golden demon as they feasted on our offerings. But instead of facing the just wrath of the Old Ones, he fled like the coward he was. All of Helgrind shook when the Old Ones raged as the murderer disappeared without a trace. But do not worry, my children, for with our sacrifice, the Old Ones shall feast and grow stronger than ever. And with that strength, they shall find the killer, devour him and have their revenge. Slobber and spittle began to drool out from the demented high priest's grey gums as he uttered a spell in the ancient language to rip away his leather robes, revealing a disgusting and horrific sight. Aside from his missing limbs, whole chunks of his flesh were missing as jagged scars lined across his mutilated body. Rejoice, for tonight we shall have the greatest of honors and receive the blessing of the Old Ones. After all, who could ask for anything more than to feed our God with the marrow of our bones? As Tosk wrote, so shall it be, roared the high priest, his eyes filled with the inner fire of a fanatic as those around him also bellowed out after him, as Tosk wrote, so shall it be. For centuries, the high priests and the most devout followers of the cult have sacrificed their flesh and blood to the Old Ones, known as the Lethablaka, either when they had reached the end of their mortal life or were faced with an impossible adversary. It was said that the stronger the prey, the stronger the Lethablaka would become. And the high priest was no fool. When he heard the rumors of the god of slaughter and his physical attributes, he instantly connected the man to the murderer of the Arazak. But what could he and his priests do against someone who was possibly stronger than Galbatorix himself? So, when he received news of Bellatona falling via a scry message from one of his priests in the city, the mad priest decided tonight was the night that the Lethablaka feasted on his body and some of his most powerful followers. By the end of the night, the Old Ones will have reached an unprecedented level of power after devouring the most powerful of high priests in the religion's history. In the dark caverns of Helgrind, a scuffing of leather on rock echoed throughout the mountain. Slowly, but steadily, the sound grew louder and louder as whoever was making it drew closer to the source of the religious cacophony. The soldiers and mages of the Empire felt themselves freeze in utter terror as their bodies reacted to the stifling invisible gas the 2 massive beings emitted. Soon, 2 of the darkest denizens of Allegezia arrived at a seemingly solid wall, and right outside was the only living thing growing on Helgrind, a single innocuous blue flower. However, that same flower was trampled in the next second as a massive 4-clawed foot tore at the stone floor, its owner phasing through the elusive wall to reveal their terrible forms to the world. First, a deadly sharp beak, 7 feet in length, appeared. Then came a pair of dark iris-less eyes the size of a man's fist that looked up at the softly glowing moon with undisguised disdain before casting its gaze over the path leading to its and its mate's nest. Seeing the large gathering of humans, the first Lethablaka saw the nude form of the high priest, realizing that tonight was one for both feasting and strengthening. With a screech of delight, the Lethablaka lunged into the sky, fully revealing the rest of its terrible physique underneath the pale rays of moonlight. A giant bony crest extended from above its hunger-filled eyes, forming an elongated skull suitable for bashing men and stone alike into pieces. Thick, corded muscle formed the neck that connected its enormous head to its body. One could say that the body structure of the first Lethablaka to be similar to that of a dragon around the size of a Jura, if said dragon had the appearance of a starved, furless dog and had thick leather skin instead of scales. As the first of the Old Ones soared to the ground with its leathery wings, a second one swiftly emerged from the same entrance, only this time as large as Saphira herself. For a moment, the moon itself was blocked from view by the behemoth beasts before the ground shook beneath their considerable weight as they landed just a few feet away from the crippled man. Instantly, all of the followers of the Book of Tosk, except for one, knelt down with their heads all but buried into the earth as their gods were present just a few feet away from them. Although the high priest couldn't physically kneel, his absolute devotion to the Lethablaka was obvious when what was left of his body trembled not in fear, but in supplication to the centuries-old creatures. A hot puff of putrid air blew across his face as the two Lethablaka leaned in close to the disfigured human. Ignoring the fear gas exuding from them, the high priest called out on the ground, having long been dropped by the terrified slaves, "It is time, my gods, for our flesh to join with yours. After this night, all of Allegezia shall bow in misery to you." Although the Lethablaka had lost the ability to speak upon achieving their mature form, they retained their keen intelligence, and thus knew what the odd human was saying. Despite being the item of their worship for centuries, they felt nothing for the humans before them other than a small annoyance that the quality of the next meal would be far less than the one right here. Without any signs of hesitation or remorse, both of the razor-sharp beaks of the Lethablaka swiftly rose up before speeding down towards the high priest. His mind, the only part of him that was mostly whole, tracked the two beaks' progress, no doubt a side effect of learning to deconstruct spells on the fly, before shutting his eyes to wait for the end. 1 second passed, then 2, then another until the unnamed high priest cracked open an eye to see two black beaks less than a centimeter from his forehead and ribs. While ecstatic at the chance to be so close to his deities, a frown of confusion marred his aged face. "Old ones, what?" His voice petered out when he spotted something at the corner of the Lethablaka's bottomless eyes, a small spark that shouldn't have been possible when light itself seemed to reject the creatures. Then he heard it, a terrible screeching noise that numbed his mind and made his entire body to tremble with instinctive fear. Whipping his head back, his dark eyes widened when he saw something equivalent to a spinning star with blades. XXX. Far above the earth hovered Naruto as Azura watched in awe as the relatively small Rasengan suddenly expanded to almost half his length. As it did, the four tiny blades of wind that spun around the orb also grew to monstrous proportions, each almost as long as his tail. How beautiful, and to think this is not even 0.1% of his base power, thought a captivated Azura as he felt his instincts flare to life as they all screamed at him to put as much distance as possible between him and the swirling wind shuriken of destruction. But he didn't. Instead he strove to imprint the sight into his brain. All dragons had an innate appetite for destruction, and the hatchling of the strongest dragon was no exception. Despite having seen the same attack through their bond, it was one thing to see it from a memory, but quite another to witness it right in front of his ringed eyes. Not to mention that the attack was much larger and felt far more potent than the one he witnessed before. Then came the sound. Wincing at the sudden shrieking of chakra-enhanced wind grinding upon itself, Azura narrowed his eyes at the radiant attack, puzzled as to why they weren't in the middle of a tornado or hurricane right now despite the furious maelstrom of mere meters away from him. Reaching through his mind, the dragon realized the only reason why he wasn't being flung around like a rag doll was because his rider was also calming the wind around them, preventing a natural disaster from forming. His attention was distracted when he heard Naruto's voice cut through the terrible noise. "Rest in peace. Futon, Raisin Shuriken." With a sigh, Naruto cocked his arm back before throwing one of the most powerful jutsus while in his restricted base form at the unsuspecting city below. Streaking across tens of miles in the blink of an eye, the evolved spiraling sphere slammed into the tallest structure in the city. It was karmic justice that the first structure destroyed would be the Church of Helgrind. XXX. Much like Azura, the High Priest and the Lethablaka all stared at what they mistook for a star as Naruto threw the deadly jutsu like a frisbee. If said frisbee was capable of drilling city-wide holes and shaking the very foundation of continents. In the first second, it glowed with the intensity of a dying star, still several miles above the ground. Then in the next, it suddenly reappeared like a bolt of lightning over Drasliona, right above the giant cathedral of his order. Except, this time the sheer size of the star became known. The damn thing is almost twice the size of the old ones in front of me. While in his mind nothing could surpass the holy ancient too, it didn't stop him from feeling the cold grip of fear around his aged heart. When he saw the giant Raisin Shuriken about to contact his ornate church, the deformed priest mentally sneered, confident in his belief. How foolish, to attack our holy place. Even Galbatorix would have trouble causing a dent on it with the hundreds if not thousands of wards engraved into the very Foundations. Boom! A thundering boom echoed across the land as a bright multicolored barrier several feet from the 3 spires of the church flashed into existence before the wind-enhanced raisin shuriken sliced through it like a hot knife through butter. Once through, the giant shuriken of energy plunged deep into the structure, killing anyone and anything in its path before finally detonating, instantly enveloping the entire holy place of the Arazak in trillions of minuscule wind blades. If he had knees, the high priest would have fallen on them. But he didn't. Instead, his lower jaw fell to the ground, his black eyes wide with absolute horror as the centuries-old place of worship turned into mere dust until even that dust disappeared from existence as the wind blades annihilated it down to the atomic level. Impossible, the wards, ancient. Whatever he was about to say was drowned out when the swirling dark blue wall of Naruto's godly chakra abruptly exploded, covering the entirety of the second-largest city of the empire in a bright white light. For an instant, the world itself went silent. There were no screams as the mad citizens dissolved, their very blood shredded from existence. No grinding of stone or metal was heard as the earth itself vaporized under the jutsu's terrible power. Not even the lapping of waves from Lake Leona as its waters evaporated upon contact with the wind blades. There was only a pure, incandescent white light as night became day as Naruto's technique tore and swallowed Drasliona and its inhabitants. After a moment, the colossal swirling sphere of wind blades reached the perimeter of the city before encasing its proud metal gates. However, it did not move 1 inch more, much to the relief of the priests and Lethablaka. Then as quickly as it came, it disappeared, caving in on itself while leaving only smooth gaping hole where once one of the wealthiest and heavily populated cities occupied. But the force from the blast could not be contained to the city alone, it had to go somewhere. And so the earth for miles tossed and turned as an earthquake rumbled across all of Alagizia. The winds howled as they tore through the sky towards the area where tons of air were displaced by the jutsu, forcing the kneeling priests and foul creatures to clutch at the ground to prevent themselves from being dragged along and torn apart by the sheer pressure. Even the heavens seemed to part as the few clouds that floated up in the sky shattered. Soon the ground around them ruptured, catching most of the priests and their sacrifices off guard before dragging them screaming into its crushing embrace. Helgrind, the tri-pronged mountain that had housed the leathery creatures and their ilk for centuries trembled as the many wards built up over the years could do nothing against the natural disaster resulting from the overcharged raisin shuriken. No doubt the spellcasters of Helgrind never expected for an earthquake or attack capable of easily destroying the bedrock and surrounding earth the Black Mountain rested on. Several minutes passed after the high priest utilized a spell to stabilize and shield himself while the 2 Lethablaka dug their hindquarters into the ground to fly to safety, only to pitch forward as they hung on for dear life, unable to take off due to the unstable ground as Alagizia continued to tremble. XXX. Unknown to the rest of the world, an ethereal green portal materialized miles away from Drasliona as the giant raisin shuriken formed in the sky, before abruptly ejecting a girl with ashen-gray hair onto the grass-ridden ground. Immediately stumbling onto her feet, she wildly looked about for any signs of her pursuers, vibrant emerald-green eyes flashing in the dark. After several seeing nothing emerge from the plains that stretched for as far as her eyes could see, the young woman let out a relieved sigh she didn't know she had been holding before collapsing backwards onto her rear. Soon, a small chuckle made its way out of her crimson lips as she stared up at the clear starry sky. Words caught in her throat when she observed an unusual star, far brighter and different in shape compared to the others around it as well as those she had seen from other worlds. What is that? Wondered the girl before seeing it slightly move. Stars weren't supposed to move, at least not so much that she could see it happen with her bare eyes. Thinking it must have been a slight hallucination brought about from sheer exhaustion, she rubbed at her eyes before looking back up again. Except this time she witnessed the same star unexpectedly appear above the large city she could see in the distance. Oh bollocks, anything else was drowned out as she watched the city simply be erased from existence before the resulting shockwave flung her meters away, knocking the wind out of her. Already near the edge of unconsciousness from the chase, the force from the blast of wind pushed her over the edge into the warm darkness. Little did the foreigner know that she was probably the luckiest one, for though bruised and battered, at least she was alive. XXX. To the east, a certain elf's eyes flew open as small tremors struck the Varden encampment, ignored by all but the most sensitive of sleepers. As she shot up from her bedroll, Arya activated her Tensigen, scanning the area to discover the wood clone who she initially thought to be Naruto still sitting in a Seiza position. Naruto, started Arya until she narrowed her eyes, having seen through what the clone actually was. A cyan-green glow began to surround her clenched fist as her slender frame shook with the force of her anger and feeling of betrayal. Arya, I won't apologize for what the boss did, but I promise that he did not do it to harm you. He just didn't want you to see him do the deed, that only he could do. Pled the clone to his boss's partner to make her understand that Naruto only wanted to protect her conscience, and more selfishly her image of him. The fist that was pointed directly at the clone faltered for a moment as its owner furrowed her brow in confusion, the link between her and lover still blocked. Before she could ask what it meant, the wood clone pointed a finger towards her, its tip just barely brushing the deceptively soft skin on her forehead. The boss is gonna hate me for this, but he should know deception is not the answer in a relationship. Instantly, Arya's mind was filled with images of what Galbatorix had done to the citizens of Drasliona. Her beautiful face, marred only by a slight scrape along her jaw, became one of fury. Despite the terrible deeds the Mad King had committed in the past century, this was by far one of the most monstrous. However, those images were soon replaced by what Naruto decided to do and what ultimately led him to knocking her out. Seeing her expression turn to one of sorrow and grudged understanding, the clone took advantage of it to press its case. The boss did not want you to stain your hands with the blood of the innocent people of your homeland, Algesia. Better for him to take the eventual fallout, considering he's not from this continent and won't be here for long after the war. Sensing Arya was waiting for it to finish, the clone continued. But there is another reason, it's because that lovable blonde idiot thought he was responsible for Galbatorix's transgression, that it was somehow his fault that he beat Galbatorix and Shuriken to within an inch of their lives, and therefore thinks he is the reason for the demise of Drasliona. Arya finished as she rubbed her temples with a hand, although considerably less angry at Naruto. She was still highly annoyed at him for both concealing the matter from her and knocking her out. The clone sighed, its outer layer already turning bark-like as it prepared to disperse itself, but not before an alabaster hand shot out to grip its wooden forehead. Before the clone could question why exactly its forehead was being gripped rather tightly by her, it began to sweat when he saw her dreaded sweet smile. Now clone, although Naruto may have blocked me from his mind, you still have a connection to him. So do not resist, or do. It won't matter in a second. The wood clone at this point could have been mistaken for a water clone with the amount of sweat that was flowing down its body. Before it could protest, a powerful force forced its way through its mental defenses, not that it tried to defend itself. All the poor wood clone could do was offer a short prayer for its creator before blacking out. XXX. After what seemed like an eternity, the earth finally settled even as the tearing winds finally ceased. Only then did the deformed priest and two Lethablaka dare to open their eyes, only for them to become the size of dinner plates as they took their first look, dumbfounded, at the full extent of the destruction. In place of a prosperous city of 100,000 was a miles-deep crater. Even now, Lake Leona was decreasing in depth as hundreds of thousands of gallons of water poured unceasingly from the connecting trench. It was as if the fist of a god, if said fist was shaped like a perfect sphere, had punched Drasliona into oblivion, leaving no trace of the city or its citizens behind. And that was not even including the surrounding area. Deep fissures covered the land like cracks on a broken china plate as far as the mortal eye could see encircled them, their depths pitch black. Not even the mile-high Helgrind escaped unscathed, 2 of its 3 peaks had collapsed. The black stone that had stood since the beginning of Algesia turned to mere piles of shattered rock. The soldiers who were encamped within were unwitting victims as the solid walls and unyielding floors closed in around them, squeezing most of them to a pulp. Looking around, the trio noticed that they were the only survivors except for a few who managed to escape with their lives behind them, if their groans of pain was of any indication. For a few seconds, the high priest continued to shield himself, before utilizing a spell that allowed him to levitate for short time, but time enough to see how the cataclysm rendered his life's work to shambles. Not even the precious hidden eggs of their gods, stored and protected behind hundreds of wards deep beneath the church, had survived. For once in his life, he didn't know what to think or do as he stared out with blank eyes, his slack jaw flapping loosely in the wind. The 2 ancient ones were no better. They had survived the terrible Arazak war that had reduced their great numbers to merely them and their eggs. They had managed to bargain with the Mad King to allow them and their hatchlings to survive, and while humiliating, they endured. But this. They could not endure this. The Lethablaka were said to be just as intelligent as the dragons and in the corners of their dark minds, they knew for all their power and reputation, they were but ants compared to whoever caused the disaster. Turning to each other, they silently came to a decision. Hearing a deafening shriek, the high priest turned just in time to see the idols of his worship frantically launch into the sky, their huge leathery wings wildly flapping as they tried to flee as far away as they could before the being in the sky took notice of them. Ancient ones! No, come back! The killer of your progeny is right there, just. The words died in his mouth when he saw something the Lethablaka only now seemed to sense as the smaller of the two whipped its head up to survey the new threat. However, it was too late. Like a flaming meteor, a nightmarish dragon covered in spiky metallic armor that was as black as hell itself bolted down from the heavens with scorching flames flaring out from under its wings, causing the dragon to be a blur of crimson and black to those watching. And was that 4 wings? Before either the priest or Lethablaka could form another thought, the fight of their lives was upon them. Not bothering to slow down, Azura continued to plow ahead, his head lowered and the deadly sharp spines on the ridge of his snout pointed upwards, prepared to gore into the leathery hide of his foes. But here, the vast experience of the two Lethablaka showed itself. Despite Azura getting the drop on them, both managed to just barely dodge out of the way of the otherwise fatal blow, their more flexible bodies proving their worth. So instead of their innards being splashed against the remnants of Helgrind, only a few flecks of blood were drawn as the razor-sharp spikes along Azura's body managed to scratch at the tough hide of his foes. Screeching their pain and eternal hatred for all dragonkind, the Lethablaka bolted as swiftly as a freshly loosed arrow towards the young dragon, their 7-foot beaks, capable shattering the finest of man-made swords and resistant to most magic due to the wards Galbatorix personally applied, each aimed at what they knew to be weak points of a dragon, specifically the eyes and the wings. Wheeling about midair, Azura lazily glanced at his two opponents. I guess that crazy man's and Fox's training was worth it. Compared to those giant meteors and tails, they might as well be hovering in the air. With almost contemptuous ease, he subtly adjusted his body such that the beaks would impact his scales. With a harsh clang, the two beaks clashed against the nigh impenetrable armor of Azura. Beaks that could have rent the scales off a lesser dragon were deflected, lighting the night with a spray of sparks. Taking advantage of their instant of stillness, the black dragon ignored their scrabbling claws as he lashed out with his own lethal claws, easily carving another 3 bloody furrows through the tough leather armor of the bigger one. Smiling at the screams of pain, Azura suddenly grunted when he felt 2 large and heavy tails impact his metal armor, not in pain, but in slight surprise at the sheer strength behind them. While not enough to truly injure him, it was more than enough to slap the air out of him as he was knocked away, tumbling through the air for several seconds before righting himself. Taking the opportunity to break away from the pinwheeling dragon, the ancient creatures used that time to catch their breaths, both cursing the scaly lizard from preventing their escape. They were both committed to killing, or at least crippling, the impudent hatchling, having seen both his sheer speed and his rider's power. They knew it was hopeless to try to escape. From their last clash, they had been injured, something that should have been impossible unless their wards were down or somehow the dragon was enchanted to ignore them. They didn't like either possibility. Their only chance lied with killing the young dragon and then hoping the backlash from the broken bond would incapacitate the rider, enabling them to make a quick escape. There were thousands of areas for them hide in, and no matter how powerful the killer of their children was, it was simply impossible for him to search every nook and cranny of the continent. With one last look at each other, the two once again charged at Azura, their dark brown bodies nearly invisible against the black of night. Yes, come. Azura madly howled in excitement, the bloodlust he only showed in battle radiating out in a red aura around himself. Puffing out his chest, the jagged scar that ran from the base of his neck to his stomach glowed a flaming orange and red as he prepared to unleash a technique he created several days ago. The Lethablaka, having fought during the Arazak War, were well acquainted with the motion, as well as what was going to happen in the next few seconds if they didn't get out of the way. Without their wards, even if they had a certain resistance to flames, getting directly hit by dragonfire was not something they wanted to experience again. Breaking off their charge, the two swerved towards the remains of Helgrind. While the collapsed mountain was no longer the towering formation it once was, it would provide ample enough cover from dragonfire. Narrowing his ringed eyes at the sight of his prey fleeing behind the broken mountain, Azura merely grinned as he opened his maw, displaying 2 rows of razor-sharp teeth, each as long as a man's leg, as well as 2 curious pipes sticking out from the back of his jaw. Inhaling one last gulp of air, Azura coaxed his flames up the mechanical tubes he had created using the Azura path, forcing them to condense as a blinding light built up over the two openings. Just as the Lethablaka disappeared from his line of sight, Azura roared out before unleashing two blazing torrents of concentrated infernos. Back on the ground, the high priest could feel his lips start to chafe as all of the moisture in the air instantly evaporated from the sheer heat radiating from the twin lasers. In the blink of an eye, the superheated blasts impacted the mountain, only to melt through it as if it weren't there. Swinging his head about, Azura watched in satisfaction as he effectively sliced the mountain in half, leaving a trail of magma red before shutting his jaw, ending the beams. For a second, the remnants of the peaks of Helgrind stood tall, only for the top half to collapse to the ground in an explosion of rock shards. Instantly, any cries of pain from the surviving few were silenced. Having half a mountain fall on you tends to do that. Finally, when the dust began to settle, he smelled something familiar. Roasted flesh. Soon, a keening cry rang out, echoing off of the ruined peaks. When the air cleared, a horrifying scene came into view. Half of the smaller Lethablaka's carcass laid smoking on the ground, its one dark eye blank and unseeing. Its other half rested several feet away, speared on one of the tips of the mountain like some kind of macabre Christmas ornament. Beside it was its larger mate, the source of the keening. For the first time in 1,000 years, it was alone. He was the last of his kind. There were no eggs, no hatchlings, and now no mate. When he died, the Arazak would truly be extinct, as they should have been hundreds of years ago. Breaking his gaze away from his deceased mate, the last Lethablaka stared at the hovering dragon with hate-filled eyes, their usual black replaced with a crimson red, before screaming out his challenge. In a burst of dirt, the last piece of a dark history rocketed towards Azura, his sanity fully gone from the death of his mate. Above, Azura looked with sad eyes, not for the Lethablaka per se, but rather that the fight was already coming to an end. Despite how one-sided it had been, it was some of the most fun he ever had since his hatching. Gazing into the maddened eyes of his opponent, the dragon realized that this was the final clash. There was not going to be another engagement. As a thanks for the fight, I'll send you off with one last move. Extending his four wings to their full extent, Azura snapped them down as he plunged towards his opponent. Flames pouring out from the mini-thrusters he had created through his namesake's path as a thundering boom reverberated across the land. Then he started to spin, his onyx spikes and flames blurring together into a tornado of teeth, protruding spikes, and flame. Tsuga. The Inuzuka family of Konoha were famous for being able to easily tear through thick tree branches and chakra-reinforced earth prisons with this same jutsu. And that was with either the shinobi or his dog, or even both. Now imagine a nearly 100-foot metal armored dragon with jagged spikes all over his body and covered with dragonfire and the ethereal flames of Amaterasu. The leather-armored Lethablaka, while admittedly larger than Azura, stood no chance. If the cunning creature had not been driven to madness from having his hatchlings and mate killed, then maybe, just maybe, he would have had the sanity to not go head-to-head with the terrible strike heading his way. But he didn't, and so he continued, beak first, claws outstretched, and massive tail at the ready in one final burst. And as they met, for an instant, the proud beak dyed in the blood of tens of dragons seemed to hold its own, even managing a small crack on one of the scales on Azura's face. However, as sure as gravity, it finally shattered, unable to resist the immense centripetal force of the Tsuga as the dragon drilled seemingly without resistance through the softer flesh and bone beneath. Ugh, gross. Azura mentally complained as bits of the Lethablaka's organs and bones practically shoved themselves into his eyes before he exited out from his opponent. As blood and gore rained down from the sky, the young dragon soon realized that while he was able to utilize the jutsu, he hadn't really mastered stopping. With the ground approaching, Azura thought, next time, I'll just close my eyes. Wait, what is that weird human thing? The last thing the high priest saw was the cause of his god's deaths spiraling directly at him before closing them. If not even the Lethablaka could resist such a fate, who am I to defy it? And so the last high priest of Cult of Tusk met his end by the claws of the hatchling of his god's enemies. Coughing out the dust, dirt, and distasteful flesh of the Lethablaka from his mouth, Azura shook the stars out of his vision, dizzy from the destructive move he managed to pull off. After all, he did just barely master most of it the night before. As he clawed his way out of the deep hole he drilled himself into, a bruising pain burst from his chest, causing the young dragon to stumble back into the dirt. Before he could check what was causing it, a hand enveloped by a brilliant yellow light gently touched the area, instantly taking away the pain. Looking down, Azura saw Naruto, unsurprised by his sudden appearance. He knew the speeds at which the blonde could travel at, never mind being able to instantly teleport wherever he wished. However, he was surprised by the unusually unhappy look on his rider's face. "You almost died, Azura, you know. An inch more to the right and you could have been killed, if not severely injured." Those words froze Azura's heart as his glowing eyes darted to the center of the injury, widening when he saw a heavily dented metal scale just barely off of his only true weak point, the fiery scar that ran from his collarbone to his stomach. For the first time in his short life, he felt true fear of himself dying, but mostly of subjecting his rider to the soul-wrenching pain of having his mentally bound partner being ripped away. Lesser men and dragons have lost their minds due to their bound partner leaving life through unnatural means. Seeing that his dragon had learned the lesson that frankly he just didn't understand when he himself was but a brat, Naruto brushed away his frown before showing a proud smile. "But still, nice job. Although I see I'm going to have to up your training in the Tsuga." As Azura somehow both smiled in pride and paled in letting his six paths chakra flow through his palm, the deep depression was rapidly healed until no trace of it was left. "Next time, remember to encase that part with armor. I know it itches and that it restricts your movement, but remember, you are only as strong as your weakest part." "Which is that?" Naruto pointed at the scar which radiated an intense heat. That was when a certain elf made herself known. "Naruto. How dare you?" Azura winced as Arya railed into his rider before promptly closing their link. The dragon knew that it was a mistake to knock out the elf the moment it happened, and judging from the pale look on his rider's face, he was right. When Naruto threw a pleading look towards Azura, he launched himself into the sky. No way in hell he was getting in between that. Nope, definitely not. Chapter 63, Visitor from Another World. "Naruto, we will have words when you get back. But for now, release that barrier that separates us," Arya commanded through the hijacked link. But Naruto was still hesitant over doing so. "But Arya, if I do so, you will be witnessing the deaths of over 100,000 innocent people, and most of all, of me doing it." He paused as he glanced from the enormous crater to the disintegrating remnants of the Lethablaka as the flames of Amaterasu burned the rest of the bits from existence. On the other side of the hijacked clone, Arya exhaled in exasperation as even now Naruto was stubbornly holding onto his noble streak. Taking out her frustration on the clone by slightly clenching her fingers around the dome of the clone's head, the elf, ignoring the small cracks that appeared, pushed more of her mind through their temporary link. Instantly, Naruto was inundated by a flood of emotions, anger at the fact he knocked her out and frustration that he refused to leave her in the dark, exasperation, but most of all of concern for his mental well-being and an intense love that left him no doubt of the reason why elves were said to only bond once in all eternity. "Arya." With a sigh, Naruto finally loosened the barriers that separated their minds, relieved that when instead of the disgust and shame he had expected to feel from his lover, he felt only contentedness and a strange sense of approval. Closing her eyes, she sent not quite a comforting message, but one that showed her understanding and approval for what he did. "I understand why you did not want me to come to witness what you did. But remember, Naruto, I am no mere human woman afraid of the idea of even killing a man. I am an elf, the strongest there ever was, and one of our beliefs that I agree with is that should something be too far gone, it is better to simply end their misery. It was mercy that you granted to the maddened citizens of Drasliona, so you should not feel burdened by their deaths. Just, come back, there is something I must impress on you in person." Arya sent through their own mental link as she allowed the wood clone to disperse itself into a twig, preparing to end it, but not before sending one last message. "Do not take long, or else I swear that I'll come hunting for you." Naruto shivered at the underlying tone. He was forgiven, but he had a feeling that he was going to be laying on the proverbial couch for a while. For the second time, Naruto sighed before staggering back onto Azura, the weight of all the innocent lives he had taken finally weighing down on his broad shoulders. Closing his azure eyes, the Exokage took deep breaths of the cold night air to calm his mind. This was of course not the first time he had killed, especially having gone through the greatest and hopefully last Shinobi War, as well as ordering the execution of missing Nin. But it was the first time that he had not only killed an innocent soul, but 100,000 of them at once. Behind him, Azura gently nuzzled his rider to try and provide a degree of comfort, having felt his distress and intense guilt through their bond. "Thanks for that, Azura. Naruto patted the dragon's snout before, his warm breath puffing out a small cloud of steam, unsealing his connection to nature with the defining characteristics of his Toad Sage mode manifesting on his face. Focusing his senses on the city, he did a cursory search for any signs of life, only to find none. Not that he expected any. Broadening his view, the sage swept his senses out for miles to encompass the entire area around Lake Leona. Nothing alive, except for the usual bugs, birds, and other animals native to the plains perked his interest. However, just as he was about to reapply the seal, he came upon something foreign at the very edge of his sensory area. Around 50 miles away there is something strange, a type of energy I've never felt before. But even now, it's flickering as if it's about to go out. Turning back to Azura, Naruto jumped onto the saddle before patting his dragon's side. Azura, you up for some more flying? Snorting a stream of smoke out of his nostrils, Azura tensed his hindquarters. It would take more than just 2 of those filthy creatures to keep me down, the dragon cockily claimed, apparently having put his near-death experience behind him before springing into the air in an explosion of earth towards the area where he felt his rider sensed something unusual. Unaffected by the cold or harsh winds from Azura's sheer speed, Naruto continued to observe the unknown being that had roused his interest. It was fascinating. The energy within had no set form, unlike the circuitous chakra pathways that interweaved throughout the body of those who could use chakra. Rather it flowed through the person along with the blood. But this signature, it felt oddly similar to those in his eyes, how curious, and alarming. Sensing that they were almost upon the unknown, Naruto redid the seal as he fixated his gaze on what he could now see as the source of the energy. A woman. White hair, a looping scar that ran from the top of her left cheek to her ear, and unusual form-fitting clothing for Alakizia. But what drew his attention were various bloody rips and scars that marked her clothes and body, as well as how pale she was. Not knowing if she had some kind of regeneration factor, Naruto knew that the young woman had a very real chance of dying. Azura, over there. Immediately upon his rider's command, Azura descended from the sky at a breakneck pace before thumping down onto the ground tens of feet away while shaking the surrounding earth. Shunshin to the side of the woman, Naruto flipped through several hand seals before outstretching his now glowing green hands over her, evidence of the Shozen Jutsu. With all of the chakra restricting seals limiting his chakra to that of a mere chunin, the once impossible technique became achievable. Various cuts, most likely from arrows, slight frostbite, chakra, exhaustion, not to mention mild malnutrition and sleep deprivation. Naruto frowned when he completed his diagnosis. Whoever this woman was, she was most definitely not from around here. Otherwise there would be tracks leading from wherever she came from. That, and it would have been damn near impossible for her to escape from her pursuers considering the freshness of her wounds. This was not even taking account to the unknown energy that by now had settled down. Now the question is what to do with you, mused Naruto as Azura inquisitively poked his snout towards the oddity before rearing back with a hiss. Raising an eye towards the black dragon's reaction, the blonde raised an eyebrow at him. She smells no, reeks of cold and frost, the very antithesis of what it means to be a dragon. Azura scowled. Somewhere, a certain unborn hatchling sneezed before settling into a more comfortable position in his egg. That's interesting, but from what I see, the cold you sensed is not coming from her. Rather, it seems as if she either came from a land of intense cold, or was attacked by a potent ice attack. Judging from her injuries, I would assume the latter. Naruto continued to look at her. She seemed so fragile, as if she would break at the slightest touch. Yet, the scars from death-defying battles, toned muscles that spoke of hard training beneath her exposed skin, and large sword that a normal man would find difficult to wield on her back indicated otherwise. That's when he came to a decision. Stooping low, Naruto glided his hands to her back and knees in a princess carry, not minding the small amount of blood that seeped into his clothes. Jumping back on top of Azura, whose scales he noted seemed to shiver, the blonde made sure she was secure. Don't move Azura, otherwise you might just knock down a tent or two. That was all the warning Azura received before the trio disappeared into a spiraling void. XXX. Several worlds and dimensions away, a herd of heavily armored horses with their equally armored riders and strange hounds wheeled about in frustration. The result of a failed hunt. Under the shade of a century-old tree, the most heavily armored one of them all threw his giant tower shield to the ground before swinging his monstrous mace over and over until the thick trunk of the tree finally couldn't take it anymore, groaning as it collapsed in a flurry of dust and splinters. Just as the warrior was about to stride to another tree, a spiked gauntlet hand fell upon his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. Glancing behind him to see a dark helm shaped like a skull, he immediately laid down his weapon. Imlerith, that is enough. Tend to them, we've no time to lose. The cold tone behind the words brooked no disobedience as the now identified Imlerith did just that while muttering his anger and frustration of having their prey once again escape. Behind the speaker, another wraith-like figure appeared, only this one was not nearly as heavily armored and carried a steel staff capped with a sphere emanating magical energy as his weapon of choice. Have you found which world Zerial went to, Caranther? Kneeling down with the end of his staff digging into the ground, Caranther shook his head. Yes, King Eragon. However, the world Zerial has escaped to is different from those we have traveled to before. The spatial density is the thickest I have ever encountered and I have not discovered any pre-existing pathways into it. For now, Zerial is unreachable. I see, and Avalakh. The golden child simply shook his head. There has been no sign of the traitor. While it is possible for him to have gone to the same world as Zerial, his signature is too weak to track. I see. Report to me the moment you finish your tasks. Lowering his head, Caranther rose back to his feet before going off into the distance for some peace and quiet to find a way into the world their quarry escaped to. As the dimension transporter left, Eragon tilted his helmed head towards the moon as he raised his hand to clasp at the edges of his frightful mask. Lifting it off, he exposed his ambition-filled icy blue eyes, bordering on gray, and pale elven face as he imagined the young woman he had been chasing for years. Clenching his fist at the moon, the king of the wild hunt thinly smiled. This is but temporary, and soon Cirilla you shan't be able to escape me. XXX. Back in the Varden encampment, a large dragon and his passengers abruptly appeared from a crack in space in front of a tent at the outskirts of the camp. Dropping down with the young woman in tow, Naruto turned back to pat Azura's snout. Go rest now, Azura, you've had a rather exciting day. Even for you, you should be rather tired after a siege battle and killing the Lethablaka. Nodding, Azura padded over to the side of the tent to lie down on his belly as Naruto turned to the tent entrance before pausing. By now, both he and Arya could sense each other through the thin layer of leather that separated them. Well, here it goes. With a push of his shoulder, Naruto stepped into the tent, to meet a pair of glowing Tensigan eyes and its owner crossing her arms in front of her chest. Well, Naruto, shall, her words died down when she saw the person in her lover's arms. Noting her injuries and status, Arya immediately swept towards the bed to lift the blankets before waving him over. Naruto swiftly complied and soon had the unconscious woman on the bedroll. However, when he saw her about to use magic to warm and heal her, Naruto reached out and grabbed her wrist. When Arya looked sideways with a questioning look, the blonde simply shook his head while pointing at their patient. Don't use anything chakra-related. Instead reach out with your senses and tell me what you feel. Tilting her head to the side, Arya looked back at the young woman, this time paying closer attention to the girl's chakra, only to furrow her brows in confusion. Just what was this energy? This was not chakra, at least none like she had ever seen. Instead, it was like a liquid, like blood. I see you discovered our visitor's condition. When I first sensed her, I was also confused as I had never felt something like this. Combined with the fact that she apparently appeared out of thin air, although it sounds crazy, I don't think she's from this world, or even dimension. Naruto revealed his guesses about the pale woman as Arya gained a look of understanding. I see why you stopped me from healing her. With that strange energy within her, we do not know how she will react to chakra actively being applied to her. I assume you only used the Shosen Jutsu on her? Arya questioned, to which Naruto nodded back in confirmation. Yes, for now I'll apply basic medical aid as her wounds are not all that serious. Her condition is mainly due to severe physical and chakra exhaustion, as well as a mild case of hypothermia. Soon a medical kit popped out from one of his seals as he went to stripping his patient with a professional touch, only barely lifting an eyebrow at the numerous scars lining her quivering body and at the red rose tattoo on her inner thigh. He had seen many thinly clad, or naked women during his time as a shinobi and applied emergency field dressings on them. Off to the side, Arya began chanting a small spell that would only heat the air around and not actively instill any chakra into the woman, all without batting an eye. Finished, the air around the shivering woman grew warm, but not too hot, soon allowing her to slip from an uneasy sleep to a soothing slumber. Finished with applying medical aid, Naruto brought the clothes up to eye level before uttering Jiken, Jayakomodori. Rapidly, the strange clothes began to change. Their rips magically mended themselves as the blood that stained parts of them evaporated from existence. Once done, the blonde laid them by the bedroll before tucking her in the blankets. So what do you plan to do with her? Naruto turned towards the voice at his side to find Arya elegantly kneeling down in contrast to his sitting cross-legged. As of now, I don't know. Though first, I must discover exactly who she is and what she's doing in our world and then determine if she's a threat and just who was chasing her. If she's neither, I'll most likely just let her go, or allow her to travel with us for a time. Seeing Arya gain a confused look, Naruto clarified. Arya-hime, when I examined her energy, I felt something similar to those in my Rinna Sharingan. The elf's eyes widened at the mention of that. Then you think she's able to control time or space? Yes, I suspect that she's able to naturally control both of those forces, which is what made me bring her here. The things you saw me do with that power was nothing compared to what I could do if I truly utilized them to their full potential. So don't be fooled by her harmless appearance, she's dangerous. Arya shot a wry glance at the blonde. You mean to most others, but not you. Rolling his eyes, Naruto returned his gaze to the sword and scabbard he had unstrapped from the woman's back. Unsheathing it, both Naruto and Arya critically ran their keen eyes along its steel edge, noting that other than a few dried bloodstains, its blade was remarkably well maintained, not even the smallest nick or mark blemished its polished surface. Clearly, whoever she was, she valued keeping her sword in perfect shape far over her clothes or her well-being. Resheathing the sword, Naruto stilled, not knowing what to say to his partner at his side. For a few minutes, neither said anything to each other, content to wait in silence for the other to start. Finally, a lilting voice broke the quiet. Naruto, are you alright? Cocking his head to the side, Naruto pretended not to know what she meant as he answered with his usual smile. Of course I am Arya-hime. I don't even have a scratch. That is not what I meant, Naruto. Arya interrupted as she placed a small soft hand on Naruto's, worry etched on her fair face. For a second, Naruto was greatly tempted to feign ignorance. However, one look into her concerned, gold-flecked, forest green orbs shattered his resolve to do so. Releasing the tension he had been unknowingly holding in, Naruto slumped to the side to rest his head on Arya's leather-clad shoulder. While the enchanted leather was hardly a comfortable perch, he didn't care. All he wanted was to be as close to the woman who he once again found love with. Seeing her love so vulnerable caused Arya to forget whatever remaining anger towards him as she raised her arms up to cradle his head to the crook of her neck, the tips of his spiky blonde hair tickling her nose, gently stroking them as Naruto utterly relaxed himself in her embrace. Several minutes passed as the two just sat there with no words being said, until Naruto softly muttered, I've killed many people, you know. From my time as a shinobi to killing thousands of soldiers at a time just to help the Varden out of tight spots. My hands are far from being clean. Arya continued to brush her hand through Naruto's hair as he continued. But never have I killed an innocent person who couldn't even fight back. Thing is, I have always prided myself in how despite all of my power, I have never used it against a civilian or anybody that wasn't trying to kill me or my friends. Naruto lifted his faintly trembling calloused hands to his eyes, as if expecting to see something on them. And now I have the blood of 100,000 such people on my hands. And the worst thing is that I did it without any hesitation at all. Arya's heart almost broke at Naruto's words as she held him closer to her. Shoo, it's alright, I'll keep your heart safe. She kept whispering while opening her mind to him, allowing her emotions to flow freely through their bond to let them do what simply talking couldn't. What she had to say to Naruto could wait another time. After all, what was time to immortals? Seconds turned into minutes, which then passed into hours as the two spent the rest of the night in each other's embrace. XXX. Several hours later, the black of night retreated as the first golden rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, bathing the city of Bellatona and the Varden in a yellow glow. Soon, a hint of light crept through the slightly parted entrance the tent of a certain couple to land on their guest's face. Emerald green eyes snapped open before wincing as the stray beam of light blinded her. Blinking away the disorienting stars faded, Zerial turned her head to search for her elven companion, only to see a very handsome man with spiky hair like the sun and probably one of the most beautiful women she had seen across the worlds embracing each other a mere foot from her. Offhandedly, she noted the rounded ears of Naruto and the pointed ones of Arya. Interesting, a man and an elf, that's not a combination you don't see every day. Zerial briefly mused before her last memory of being knocked out from whatever annihilated Drasliona shocked her back into extreme wariness. Ignoring her body's screams of pain as she shot up to a sitting position, she searched for her sword, only to find it, to her dismay, beside the man and just out of reach. I could flash to my sword, but then Eragon and that damned navigator Caranther would instantly sense where I am. Gritting her teeth, she decided to leave her sword for later in favor of gathering information of the world she landed in. Where am I? And who are you? And where is Avalak? Stuttering, she completely forgot the near impossibility of him understanding her. When she saw the confused look on both Naruto's and Arya's faces, she almost wanted to smack her forehead in exasperation. Of course he doesn't understand me. I'm in a different world after all. Realizing the common problem she usually ran into upon staying in a world for more than a few minutes, Zerial attempted to communicate to the two with hand gestures as she tried to convey her intentions. Seeing the odd gestures, Naruto sighed as his vain hope of maybe understanding her shattered. Now he had to find a way to understand the woman in front of them beyond just using hand signs. Well, there are only a few options to what I could do, either utilize my ninjendo path, or slowly learn her language. That's not happening. Yet I don't know what would happen if I used a chakra technique on her, especially when it involves her soul. As the white-haired woman continued to try and converse, Naruto quickly weighed the pros and cons of using ninjendo, before coming to a decision. Sending a thread of chakra into his eyes, he quickly caught the still gesturing woman in a genjutsu before grasping her forehead with his right hand. Instantly, Zerial fell silent as her arms fell limply to her side, her green eyes blank and unseeing as they saw whatever Naruto wanted her to see. Reaching out with a hand, Naruto lightly grabbed at her forehead before muttering, "Ninjendo." Beside him, Arya watched as Naruto partially pulled an ethereal green silhouette in fascination, quickly realizing that the girl's soul was literally in his hand. Although she had witnessed Naruto months ago temporarily bring Braum back from the dead, it was completely different to see him touching the soul of a still-breathing person. Closing his eyes, Naruto made sure to only absorb knowledge of her language, loathing the feeling of forcibly searching through a person's memories. It felt as if he was doing just wrong, unless the person was someone like Galbatorix or the Arazak, then, he was more than happy to strip them of their memories. Before he was done, Naruto paused before inserting his knowledge of Alagesia's language into her head. Who knows, maybe she'll be able to understand what others are saying now, even if she won't be able to speak it. Mused the blonde, allowing his Rinne Sharingan to fade to their usual cerulean blue as he sent what he learned to Arya, who in turn closed her eyes to process it. Alright, let's try this again, thought Naruto as he released the genjutsu. Do you understand what I'm saying now? Widening her eyes in surprise, the young woman blinked several times before narrowing her eyes. Yes, I can, but what did you do to me? I felt something odd just a few seconds ago. Whoa, calm down, I only performed a jutsu that auto-translates whatever we say to each other. Naruto put up his palms in an effort to calm Zerial down and divert her attention from his technique. He had a feeling she wouldn't be all that ecstatic that he literally held her soul within his hand just a minute ago. Well, I don't know who this Avalak is, but as for your other questions, I found you injured and knocked out a few miles from Drasliona alone. So I brought you here to recover. And as for me, I'm Naruto and this here is Arya. Naruto gestured towards Arya, who nodded in greeting, as he supplied some harmless answers to show that they meant no harm. It seemed to work as Zerial seemed to relax her tensed muscles, although she still kept her eyes on her sword. Noticing where she was glancing, Naruto reached down to grab the sheathed blade before handing it to her. Most would argue his foolish action of handing a potential enemy back her weapon, but Naruto had an answer for them. Hell would freeze over before he was taken off guard by somebody a fifth of his age, with or without a sword. Seeing that she was distracted with checking her blade for any signs of tampering or damage, Naruto decided that now was the best time to try and get some answers. So, how about you, where do you come from? And what can we call you? Having been greatly mollified with the return of her longtime companion, the foreigner readily answered as she tilted her blade to get a better look at the scattered bloodstains along its edge. Siri, they call me Siri and I come from a faraway land, you doubt you've heard of it. Nodding, Naruto could see she was still wary about them and was about to ask her who was chasing her when suddenly, the entrance of their tent had parted to reveal a messenger in boiled leather armor. Lord Naruto, Ajihad requests, the messenger started before his words caught in his throat as his eyes grew huge at the sight of a near-naked Siri who, despite her injuries, was still an extremely stunning woman with her orange-tinged emerald eyes, exotic silver hair, and lithe but not overly skinny body. Gulping, he continued to stare, completely forgetting his message until a loud cough shook him out of his trance. You can go tell Ajihad that I'll be there, now shoo. Bobbing his head, the messenger swiftly took his leave, not daring to disobey the clear dismissal of the man that single-handedly killed over 10,000 people in the Battle of the Burning Plains. It simply wasn't worth displeasing him, not even for another glance at the attractive nearly nude woman in his tent. Damn lucky bastard! Mourned the unimportant messenger as he quickly made his way back to Ajihad's tent. For a second or two after the tent flap closed, a slightly awkward silence pervaded the tent as Siri shot an indignant glare at Naruto while crossing her arms underneath her modest bandage-wrapped bust, her sword still in hand. What is this? Did you undress me? Arching an eyebrow at the questions, Naruto shrugged as he casually reached out to poke at one of the large bruises on her stomach she had acquired after being hit by the shockwave from his attack, eliciting a small gasp of pain from Siri, before he tossed her clothes at her. Well, I had to strip you to treat your wounds and fix your clothes, unless you rather have lost some bits of yourself to frostbite and allow your wounds to fester. Interesting, it would seem she was able to understand the human language of Algesia. That makes things much easier. Catching her clothes, Siri puffed out her cheeks in mock anger, more upset at the fact that she didn't evoke more of a reaction from the attractive blonde, as she started to pull on her tight leather trousers. For a second, she wondered if perhaps her benefactor was gay, as most men couldn't, other than the anal, keep their eyes off her, or rather at the small amount of cleavage she intentionally showed. However, that thought was struck from her mind as she watched Naruto help Arya stand, their movements far too intimate for ones to be between just friends. Shame, I probably would have made a move on him if he wasn't already taken. Siri briefly entertained the notion before squashing it down. Now wasn't the time for brief romances and flings when the wild hunt was still after her. Strapping her sword to her back, Siri looked back to see Naruto and Arya already making their way out of the tent. Hey, wait! I'm coming with you. Stopping, Arya finally spoke up, having been using the time to process the common speech Siri was speaking with. No, you should stay and rest. Your wounds are still healing and any sudden movement will reopen them. She didn't get any further when the younger woman cut her off. My injuries are fine and I can already walk, see, Siri fiercely rebutted as she took her wobbly first step, determined to prove the elf wrong, only, for her muscles refused to move in a coordinated manner, causing her to pitch forward towards the ground. If nobody helped her, her face was fated to become good friends with the grassy floor. It was fortunate that a certain blonde shinobi would never let that happen in front of him. Geez, you really don't like listening to advice, do you? Siri felt rather than heard the amused chuckle as the chest she was leaning on vibrate with the force of the sage's laughter. Thank you, I didn't think that even walking was beyond me. But I assure you, I'm fine now. Slightly blushing at both the hard inclined planes of Naruto's chest and her shameful fall, Siri thanked the blonde for catching her as she attempted to steady herself. It was at this time when her stomach decided that now was the best time to express its hunger. Immediately, a loud growl rumbled through the tent, eliciting a pair of deadpan stares from both Naruto and Arya as Siri turned crimson in embarrassment. I believe Ajihad can wait, and if the meeting is about what I think it is, then I'm definitely not in any hurry to go there. Naruto said as his shoulders imperceptibly slumped, much to Siri's confusion, which only grew when she saw Arya place a comforting hand on his shoulder. Just what does he mean? From the movement of his shoulders, something terrible must have happened, and from the way Arya is comforting him, he might have been the reason behind it. Her thoughts were interrupted when she saw Naruto waving towards her to the center of the tent. Confused, as the middle of the space was utterly devoid of anything, her jaw dropped when a table suddenly appeared in a puff of smoke, along with several chairs and large bowl of steaming noodles. What? How? Siri stuttered as she tore her gaze to Naruto's steady one, a strange mix of astonishment, fear, and most of all, hope. While she was no stranger to the magic arts, having been around her surrogate mother Yennefer and the Witchers of Kaer Morhen for the better part of her life, as well as being mentored by Avalakh, none of them could do so without using any words, motion, or at least some signs of preparation. Especially if this magic was what she suspected it was. Could it be? Naruto, was that space magic? Her voice trembled as she pointed at the table, chair, and food. Ordinary objects she would normally not have even given a second glance at now seemed ironically magical. We can talk about that later. For now, eat up. Judging from your condition, you must have not eaten in days. Naruto once again gestured toward the table before sitting himself in one of the chairs with Arya doing the same right beside him. For once, Siri didn't express her headstrong self and instead did as she was told. Drawing out the chair, she immediately attacked the food with her fingers, not even bothering with the pair of chopsticks next to her. Across the table, Naruto and Arya watched in sick fascination as the rich bowl of ramen seemingly evaporated underneath the woman's speedy hands. By the log, and I thought my tableside manners were bad when I was young. At a speed that would have given Naruto himself a run for his money, Siri quickly finished the bowl of ramen, setting the bowl down with a thud as a happy and satisfied smile crossed her scarred face. I take it that you enjoyed the ramen? Riley asked Naruto, already knowing the answer. Very, thank you. I've not eaten in days with it. Siri stopped before she could mention the wild hunt. Thank you for your hospitality, but I must ask you, what magic was that before? Pulling up his sleeve, Naruto revealed the near-invisible seals running along his arm. These are what my people call storage seals. Essentially, we create a miniature pocket dimension in which we can store a variety in amount of objects, including food, clothes, tables, and most of all weapons. Unknown to Siri as she leaned over to get a closer look, a mischievous glint twinkled in his blue eyes as he sent a slight burst of chakra through one of the storage seals. In a large puff of smoke, a familiar executioner blade slammed into and through the table before grinding to a halt in the ground. Ah! Yelped Siri as she snapped her hand back to the hilt of her sword, half drawing it until she heard Naruto laugh out loud. What was that for? Siri pointed her finger towards the blonde, her green orbs flashing as she kept her hand on her sword, only to sweat drop when she saw Arya knock her fist into the back of his head. Naruto, that was too much, even for one of your pranks. Look at her, she's absolutely terrified. Arya lectured her lover who merely rubbed the back of his head with a fox-like grin on his face. Nah, she's not scared, just look at her, only righteous fury and a curiosity that could rival even yours. And come on Aryaheim, just look at her now. Before she was so tense and wary of us, now she's only wary of us. Another sweat drop joined the first one when Siri heard the blonde's words. Sighing, the otherworlder let her sword slide back into her sheath in favor of closely examining Kubikurabocho, the blade's design and size drawing her in. Seriously, his oddness can give the witchers of Kaer Morhen, bless their souls, a run for their orans. She shook her head before returning her attention to the massive blade. An immense blade, the wielder must possess great strength just to hold the sword, never mind wielding it. 2 cutouts, one at either side of the blade, yet still as sharp as its edge and suspiciously of similar size to a person's head, possibly for beheading. So a sword meant for decapitation and execution. A blonde and dual-colored brow rose at the young woman's muttered observation. Impressive, whoever trained you did well. To establish Kubikurabocho, the decapitating carving knife's true nature without understanding its name is not easy. Was it your father who taught you so? My father? No, it was my uncle who did so. It was then Naruto managed to glimpse past the blustery facade Siri kept up when her bright eyes seemed to dull as looked down, towards the ground, that behind the strong, fierce, and headstrong young woman laid her other half, one filled with doubt and anger towards herself. He did not need his emotion-sensing ability to know that she was no danger to himself or his friends, but rather somebody in need of some help that he could provide. You're afraid, aren't you? Siri's head whipped up, a protest already on her lips that died when she saw the sad look in Naruto's profound ocean blue eyes. She had seen that same look in many of the people in her life, Geralt, Yen, Triss, Lambert, Eskel, Vesemir, the list went on. For all their youthful looks, their eyes belied their true age, the sheer experience throughout the years lending them a dour wisdom only age could bring. However, she froze upon Naruto's next words. Afraid that you'll never see the people you love, who you hold above even your own life, and would do anything to keep them safe, even if it means keeping the ones chasing you within arm's reach. Stumbling back as if she was struck, Siri instinctively drew her sword. Its shaking tip pointed at the calm blonde who kept his eyes on hers as a storm of emotions swirled within her. Never before had anyone, not even Geralt or Avalak, deconstructed her so easily and told her so bluntly within only a few minutes of meeting. It angered her that the man was able to do so. It made her suspicious as she wondered just how Naruto was able to tell somebody was chasing her. But most of all, it scared her to hear his words, and know them to be true. Siri. That one word seemed to trigger something within her, something she had kept hidden and suppressed in order to keep ahead of the wild hunt. Pointing her quivering steel blade that had protected her all these years, Siri let loose of everything that had been building up. Stay back. Just how did you know I was being chased? And who do you think you are to know of my struggles that started the day I was born? How I had to flee for my entire life because of this accursed elder blood running through my veins. To have power beyond my understanding, beyond what should be possible for humans and not be able to control it, forever in fear of harming or even killing the ones you love. Just what do you know? For a moment, nobody said anything except for the sound of heavy pants and groans from Siri as she gripped her side, grimacing as she felt some of her wounds reopen from her rant, while Arya kept a silent watch as she watched her love try to heal their guest of her mental wounds. I don't know. I don't know what events shaped your life. I don't know what this elder blood is. I don't know how your powers, whatever they may be, have changed you and caused you to flee so far. Naruto admitted as Siri's shoulders seemed to slump, her faint hope of finding someone who could just understand, even if just a little, perished. And yet, I know everything. Siri's ears perked up at the words as she sent a disbelieving look at Naruto, only to see him well within her personal bubble. When did he? Her alarmed thought ended when she felt herself be pulled into a warm embrace, not one of love or pity, but of understanding and compassion. I know how it feels to be rejected from the day you were born. I know the fear that grips at your heart and soul when you possess an impossibly destructive power that you cannot possibly hope to understand. I even know how it feels to be separated from those you love and that you may never see again. Naruto softly muttered into her ear, his hands gently gripping her slim trembling form. And yet, I also know of courage that can only be given by teachers, friends, and trusted comrades. To know of victory when finally, something goes right. And finally to know of acceptance as the power you so feared and hated was not something to be hated at all, but was merely waiting for you to accept it. Looking into the deep azure orbs, Siri saw no trace of malice, greed, lust, or desire for her power she had faced all her life. Only a quiet kindness and empathy from the strange man she just met this morning who managed to peel away all of the layers she had built up over her years. So let me ask of you, Siri, do you want my help? At that time, she didn't know what caused her to answer the way she did, only that it was probably the best decision of her life. Yes. That's it for part 11. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.